various ways to search the decks for additional lands, and usually capping off with some number of Eldrazi.
Yep. And Alex is going to lead off with Island into Sensei's Divining Top. That's Matthew White's trick, right?
Well, potentially.
Looks like Matthew White does not have a top of his own. So Sensei's Divining Top, kind of the glue that holds both of these decks together.
Yeah, a little more critical for the Miracles deck in my mind, because you have so many more shuffle effects, and you have counterbalance to attempt to establish the lock. The blue-green deck is trying to assemble kind of a combo of its own, but you have a lot more redundant search. You have a lot more land searchers in this deck. We see some lists that go and play things like Into the North plus a bunch of snow-covered lands. Here it is just crop rotation, but that's still quite a bit of search alongside Expedition Map and a couple other effects like Primeval Titan.
Yep, plenty of redundancy for these cloud posts. We see Alex already with one in play, found it off of that top, and give the top another spin to see if he can find cloud post number 2, whether it be a real cloud post, a virtual cloud post of some flavor, to get things out of control.
So this deck does have Eye of Ugin in it. That's a land I can search for, of course, and has Ulamog and Emrakul to finish off the game.
That is I believe, a Bajuka Bog that Alex played there. So that's a one-of that he can crop rotation for.
Yeah, there's some value lands in the deck because you have Primeval Titan, because you have crop rotation, Bajuka Bog there. The graveyard matchup's pretty hard to interact with otherwise, so pretty natural inclusion there. Glacial Chasm is also in the list. A Cavern of Souls, which you can use to make something like Primeval Titan uncounterable, so a lot of cool lands.
Yeah, that Glacial Chasm in particular. Yeah, I've seen Blue-Green Cloud Post on camera. I've been in the booth for Blue-Green Cloud Post, I think 3 times now. Both of the other times that I've seen this deck, I feel like Glacial Chasm has just won the match by itself.
It is one of the cards, to me, it's one of those cards where when it's in your 75, you need 1 copy, because you can go find it, and it probably picks you up 2 or 3 game wins at least over the course of the tournament.
Yeah, not in this matchup so much. This is not really a Glacial Chasm spot.
I expect it to be among the first cards boarded out.
So, third land and pass for Matthew White. Alex going to go for a Brainstorm and deepen the tank here. Likely trying to set up something explosive. He doesn't have a fetch land in play to shuffle, but there are actually a lot of other ways to shuffle your deck. In his deck, he can use crop rotations or expedition maps to reset his deck once he brainstorms. Currently, no way to actually cast a crop rotation, although I'm sure he could handle that. And a draw step Vendilion Click coming down for Matthew White. So we're going to take a peek at Alex's hand. That is a lot of giant animals. Primeval Titan, Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, Oracle Moldiah, crop rotation, and there's an Eye of Ugin up top, I believe.
So it wouldn't surprise me if Matthew just said, keep these.
I think so. So yeah, currently no green source in play. So the scary spells here, the Oracle and the crop rotation, we actually can't cast those right now, and we are several turns off from actually having to worry about Eye of Ugin or Ulamog.
The issue is the risk of letting Alex get to a green source seems larger than the threat of any cards in those hands, because a lot gets unlocked once he has access to green mana.
That is true, and he is going to get to take a peek with Sensei's Divining Top for green mana if he wants, but he could also just cast Show and Tell, which looks like what he's going for. That does resolve, and it is a Primeval Titan for Alex, and actually a Batterskull for Matthew White. One of these things is a powerful mythic, and the other one is a slightly more powerful mythic.
Now, for those of you who have never seen Cloud Post in action before, the issue is, even if you kill the Primeval Titan, often way too much damage already done.
For sure. Just by virtue of coming into play and triggering, we see 2 more Cloud Posts popping out of the deck for Alex. That is adding, what, 8 mana, right?
Well, those are 6 right now because there is only the other Locust in play.
Sure.
So those are each 3 mana. Oh, sorry, those are, I'm sorry, I thought that was a Glimmer Post. So those are 9, 10, 11, 12 mana in play right now. That's a lot.
So yeah, even if Matthew does have, as you said, Swords of Plowshares for the Primeval Titan, turns over a Terminus, something like that, I think the damage is very much done, particularly knowing that there is an Eye of Ugin still in Alex's hand.
Yeah. Hypothetically, if Matthew has Swords of Plowshares on the spot, maybe he can race, but even that's pretty unlikely.
It's a tall order. He did not get an opportunity to swing there with the Batterskull, just going to crack in for 3 with Vendilion Click. and has to pass it back. And Alex spins the top and prepares to do something filthy.
The issue is if he couldn't do anything last turn, it's not that likely he can do something this turn.
True. Yeah, if Matthew White had any way to interact in his hand, you have to suspect that show and tell would not have resolved.
Yeah.
Now, granted, he does have mana this turn. He was tapped out for Vendilion Click last time. So we may see actual factual counterspell, Spell Pierce. We're well past the point where Spell Pierce matters, I think. But we do see main deck blasts on occasion, which I don't actually... Nope, Matthew White does not have any of those, so...
So each of those lands now tap for 5 mana, so that puts them to 15, 16, 17, 18.
That's a lot of mana. And there we go. Ulamog from the hand. This is what, turn 4?
Yeah, and, you know, just casually tapping 2 lands to cast his Ulamog.
Mm-hmm.
The next turn, Ivugan goes and can find Emrakul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Ivugan, not only can it find Emrakul, it actually can just re-find Emrakul. Yeah, if Matthew White finds any sort of solution, then it just goes back to the graveyard, shuffles back in. So the Emrakuls just keep coming and coming.
Yeah, a crazy feature about this deck is it's not, you know, Emrakul, wait a turn, attack you.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually hard cast Emrakul,
Yep.
take another turn, potentially bounce it back to hand with Karakas if
Yes.
some way you have some way to weather the storm or the first Emrakul time block plus Annihilator 6 plus 15 damage.
And speak of the devil, that is an Emrakul fetched out with Ivugan. Did we have enough mana to cast it this same turn? I believe we do. Usually when the game gets to the stage for a Cloudbow deck, I'm not worried about numbers anymore.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I count the mana because, you know, I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure if he can go and do this. And then I count it. It's like, oh, he has 12 extra mana left over at the end of everything. It
Yeah.
wasn't even close.
It looks like he actually did not have enough mana to cast it, but Matthew White sees the writing on the wall. That Emrakul was there. It was going to come down and cause trouble.
And you can see the problem with Blue-White Miracles in the matchup here. Not a lot in the way of pressure, no way to break up the mana. It's just at the mercy of the Cloud Post draw without very many ways to interact.
Yes. At the mercy of the Cloudbow draw, and actually nothing to be done about Ivugan in particular.
Yeah. So moving on to the sideboard here, Alex Khanin, our blue-green Cloud Post player here. 3 copies of Swan Song, 3 Blue Elemental Blast, a Fencer Shaper Savant, a Crow's Hand Grip, a Moment's Peace, a Phyrexian Revoker, 4 copies of Force of Will, and a Relic of Progenitus. I think that there's not a lot to be done here. I like Swan Song, I like the Crow's Hand Grip, and that's about it. I don't think it needs to make any enormous upgrades or changes to the deck.
Yeah, honestly, I don't hate it, a lot of these cards, but I'm not sure that you don't necessarily want to mess with a good thing here. So it's just kind of a question of, like, are there any real stinkers in the main deck?
Well, the thing that Alex can do, he can cut his Pithy Needles. Usually Needle is in here to fight over a Wasteland. That's the most common form of disruption. And the Cloud Post deck will often, in the dark, go first turn, land Sensei's Pithy Needle naming Wasteland with no other information. When you're not playing in that kind of matchup, you can afford to let the Pithy Needles go, in my opinion. Now, Matthew has shown Batterskull, so it's reasonable to assume that there's Stoneforge Mystic in the list, maybe some other things to fight over. But since you also have Sensei's Divining Tops of your own, you don't really want to needle Sensei's Divining Top. So I think the Needles can likely go in this matchup.
Sure. Yeah, don't love the Needles. We mentioned Glacial Chasm as a card that you probably don't need post-board. I have a hard time imagining a situation where you want the one main deck Moment's Peace, for example.
Yeah, no, there's some cuts here. I mean, one main deck Moment's Peace seems not great to me, but also not the end of the world to have access to. You know, Matthew does have to race with Vendilion Click, a Batterskull, whatever he has access to. So I definitely wouldn't bring in the second copy, but if the one still ended up in Alex's deck, I wouldn't raise an eyebrow at it.
Right, yeah, so basically I think you have room for, at most like maybe 4 or 5 cards that you are pretty confident you want out.
Yeah.
And then you think Swan Song is probably the card you want the most. You wouldn't hate Force of Will. You wouldn't hate, Venser even. But I think 3 Swan Song and the Grip, those are the cards you definitely want in the matchup. On Matthew's side, Matthew has access to 2 Stoneforge Mystic. That is to complement the 0, actually. Okay, that's cool. So 0, there they are, sorry. Yeah, 2 Stoneforge Mystics in the main, 2 more in the sideboard. 1 Council Judgment, 3 Power Blast, 1 Wear and Tear, 2 Meddling Mage, 1 Pithing Needle, 1 Engineered Explosives, 2 Rest in Peace, 1 Humility, and 1 Supreme Verdict. So Humility is a sweet one.
Humility is pretty nice.
We also gain access to Meddling Mage, which can shut off Show and Tell.
Yeah.
So you basically buy yourself time that way. There's certainly certainly Alex can actually go nuts without ever casting a really scary spell.
Right.
But he needs a lot of time to do that. So I don't hate the meddling mages. I definitely want humility, and I'm not actually sure if you want to. Do you need Stoneforge Mystic here just to like apply pressure?
I think that Stoneforge Mystic is too anemic. I would imagine that Stoneforge is in this deck primarily for the beatdown matchups,
Sure.
or places where the games go long and you want to have access to more Stoneforges. But here, I think 2 is probably the right number.
Yeah, well, I mean, the card is not powerful. You know, like turn 2 Stoneforge Fetch Batterskull is not so impressive against what Alex is doing. But you know, this is one of the few matchups for Miracles where you do not have inevitability.
Yeah.
You have to get the game over with, or before your opponent does. So I can see an argument for like needing to ramp up the aggression for that reason.
Well, the question is then, what does he have access to in his main deck that are easy cuts?
I don't love most of the removal spells actually. The Swords to Plowshares, again, it buys time, but it's a band-aid. You do not want to be Swords to Plowsharesing a Primeval Titan. So I think all 4 of those can go safely. I am not in love with Terminus either. I think you have to have some of them. So I don't think you want all 4 of those. So I would maybe cut 2 Terminus and 4 Swords.
Okay.
So there's plenty of room there. So like that's one humility, the 2 meddling mages, I think. And the question is Stoneforge 3 and 4, is that better than Council's Judgment, which is actually, it can answer Eldrazi?
So I think that if Matthew's draw is aggressive enough, removal spells for Primeval Titan do have the potential to matter. I mean, his draw's got to be real good, but I don't think it's completely useless to have ways to kill Primeval Titan.
All right, fair. And then other than that, yeah, I actually do like, of course, I like Force of Will Counterspell. We joked about Spell Pierce being kind of awkward, but it is a really important card to have in your opening hand.
Yeah, being able to counter an Expedition map. You know, this Cloudpost deck does get a lot of hands that kind of don't go anywhere, or are really hubbing around one card, whether it's a Crop Rotation, a Sensei's Divining Top, an Expedition map, what have you.
Yeah.
So being able to Spell Pierce that stuff early. Now, of course, the shelf life on Spell Pierce is real short.
True.
But early on, it can be a really valuable play.
Sure. Yes. Spell Pierce looks really awkward late. Fortunately, this is Legacy. We have Brainstorms. We have Jace's, in fact. So we have kind of duplicate Brainstorms. There are certainly mechanisms in Matthew White's deck to shuffle away the cards you don't want.
Yep.
So a card that is very high impact early and no impact late is fine. So this time it's Matthew White that's going to lead off with a Sensei's Divining Top. That is, again, as I mentioned, kind of the glue that holds this deck together. And definitely a function that he is going to want to have going every turn of the game.
It's one of those things. I don't know if it's the most powerful card in the deck, but it's definitely the most important.
Yes. Alex going to match him, so dueling tops. Again, Matthew White not going to have a lot of main phase plays in these early turns unless he, slams the Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah, to your point, though, he does need to get something going kind of early.
Mm-hmm.
He can't sit around all day because this is one of the few matchups in Legacy where Miracles does not have inevitability.
Yeah, and this would have been a window to sneak that in where, as the game progresses, you're going to have turns where you need your mana. If you have, or well, at least you need to represent interaction of some kind. And there it is, in fact. So Matthew White does have a Stoneforge Mystic in his hand, but choosing to sit on Counterspell instead.
And I think that play makes sense.
You're concerned about countering Expedition map or Crop Rotation here?
Yeah. I think that if you put your shields down here, things can just get too messy.
Maybe.
So I guess if your opponent leads with the Sensei's Divining Top, there's good enough odds that your opponent's turn 2 is just spin my top, pass it back to you, shovel my deck, maybe play a Locust, something like that.
Yeah, from Tropical Island Sensei's Divining Top, I don't think there's any way for Alex to cast a Show and Tell on turn 2. So the most scary spell that you're going to see, I think, is going to be a way to search for a land, right? Mm-hmm. And those are redundant enough. But so in fact, here it is. He's going for Expedition map, and I guess Matthew White is thinking about it.
This is a spot where I feel like Matthew does have to use his Counterspell because he can't just leave 2 mana up the entire game.
Absolutely.
He needs to get something going. Mm-hmm. So if the spell is at all reasonable, I think that's enough to counter it, and Expedition map qualifies as such.
Yep. So gets to use his Counterspell, and it's kind of an interesting question. Is that are you happy about counterspelling an Expedition map? It's possible that he kind of was committed at that point to just using his mana, but For whatever it's worth, there goes Expedition Map. He then untaps and Stoneforges up a Batterskull.
I think he just has to counterspell. You know, given that he's gave up his second turn to leave up counterspell, I think the spell in question, if it's anything that matters, has to be countered, and Expedition Map crosses that line.
Yeah. Oh, and you're absolutely right that I don't think there is much merit to, you know, playing a land and passing again if you don't use the counterspell, and then hoping to hit your fourth land, play Stoneforge, and leave counterspell up then.
All the while, Alex is, you know, shuffling his deck with a Divining Top in play, searching for lanes with Expedition Map.
Spinning the top, developing his mana, just generally causing trouble. And we are going to see a top spin from Matthew. So I do see a force. I believe I also saw a Council's Judgment, but I would not swear to that one. So Matthew White is going to have interaction this game for sure. And actually there is a Force of Will as well for Alex. Might see some dueling wills.
I have a feeling Alex's are going to be better this game.
Likely. Alex does need to find something worth protecting.
Yep. But once he actually does push something through, Matthew can't really catch up.
So Alex is going to untap, consider his options, possibly go for... Okay, so Blaze Vesuva, one has to assume copying, and there we go. Yeah, copying a Cloud Post.
So now he's up to 4 mana and potentially 6 next turn.
Is that a explosive for 0?
Yep.
Okay, and that is preemptively hoping to deal with a Batterskull Germ.
Yeah, I think at this point, Alex is pretty happy to play kind of a racing game. It's not a permanent answer to the Batterskull, but he doesn't need a permanent answer to Batterskull. He just needs enough time to get his mana on board.
Yeah. This will... Basically, this commits 5 more mana for Matthew. You know, 3 to bounce the Batterskull, 2 to put it back into play. And at least 2 attack steps, I believe.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of time.
yes, buying a lot of time for sure, which is, as you mentioned, of crucial importance. And there we go, buying actually even more time. That's a repeal, bouncing the germ.
Ugh.
Getting a little bit of value there. Yeah, and just knowing that that energy explosive's still just sitting there. Yeah, Matthew White kind of has to get that feeling like I am not attacking for 4 with this germ for like 5 more turns at this point.
I think Matthew's still holding up Force of Will through all this, but it's not clear counterspells are going to provide resistance against what Alex is doing.
No, yeah, I definitely am not excited about Force of Willing or Appeal either. So, yeah, just not a good spot either way for Matthew White. So, Alex bought the turn with that repeal, bought a fresh card in fact with that repeal, and then another one on his draw step. Has kind of a clear window to do something broken. Yeah, we know that Matthew White does have a Force of Will in hand and 5 mana to cast it. Alex with a Force of Will of his own. I guess we don't actually know for sure if Alex has a blue card to go with that Force of Will. He did use one with the repeal.
Yeah, there aren't really that many blue cards in this deck. It's an interesting element of it. I mean, 4 Brainstorms, 3 Repeals, 3 Show and Tells, a Trinket Mage.
And actually, well, plays Cavern there. One has to assume naming is it Giant. Primeval Titan is Giant, right? All right, so did name Giant with that Cavern of Souls, so possibly just doesn't need to use his Force of Will at all. Although it does not have a Giant to follow up, apparently.
4 copies in this list, naturally.
So, okay, just fetching an island, topping, going for a spin. Yeah, there's a Terminus on top. Well, in the top 3 for Matthew White. So, does actually have an instant speed answer to, well, anything really. Again, saying answer to Primeval Titan is a little sketchy, but can buy a ton of time. All right, Jace the Mind Sculptor coming down for Matthew. And yeah, Jace is kind of renowned as a win condition. One of those cards you just don't come back from. I feel like among this Cloud Post deck's other merits is actually one of the most resilient decks against Jace.
Well, the thing is, Jace is usually the most powerful card in either player's list in a game, especially when the board's stable. But Blue-Green Cloud Post able to bring things much larger to the table, go over the top of Jace. Very few decks in the format can say that.
So yeah, there is some consideration here for Alex to force the Jace, and it looks like that is what he is going to pull the trigger on, pitching Brainstorm. all that mana, only one blue source. So unfortunately, Alex cannot just simply hardcast the Brainstorm, and Matthew's going to fight over it. Force pitching Brainstorm of his own.
It's one of those rules of Legacy. If your opponent's willing to force something, it's usually correct to force back.
Sure.
Yeah, now.
Oh, okay, all right. So yes, the Jace the Mind Sculptor does resolve. Matthew takes it up, looks to Fate Seal Alex, and apparently Alex intended to top in response. So there's, all right, we're gonna have some. A judge gonna have to figure something out here. Matthew White definitely jumping the gun a little bit there. You definitely, as a general rule, you want to, check with your opponent when you announce an effect of any kind, really. Just like, hey, do you have responses? In this particular case, when it is an effect that actually takes a peek at your opponent's library, doubly so.
And very few people respond to a Jace Fate Seal. It's really only with Divining Top in play that this comes up. So it's not it's a very common thing, I can imagine, shortcutting or rushing through, but of course, not legal under normal circumstances, and especially so with the Divining Top in play.
Yeah,
so we're
sure.
going to have a judge sort that out momentarily. Welcome back to the booth, Patrick Sullivan, Andrew Shrout. What do you think of this Cloud Post deck? I mean, is this something that you would seriously consider bringing to a Legacy event?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to play unfair when I play Legacy. I've played Dredge in the past. I've played Reanimator in the past. I've played Storm in the past. This deck is on that same spectrum, but it does actually get to play like fair, quote unquote, in the sense that it gets to play Force of Will, Brainstorm as well. So you're still playing Legacy, because kind of that old, you're not playing Legacy unless you're brainstorming.
Right.
So it still gets to do that, but also it has the end gameiest end game in most matchups.
Yeah, it's an intriguing deck. The susceptibility to Wasteland and the fact that it just kind of gets disconnected hands sometimes. You're set up where you can't find your Cloud Posts in time, or you draw too many of your expensive stuff, or show and tell without one of your things to show and tell in the play, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these like little pieces of inconsistencies and liabilities woven in, but the games where you do get to do your thing, it seems like a legitimately powerful deck, and some of the matchups are excellent.
I think the argument that sometimes your draw doesn't come together, that's an argument you can make about a lot of decks, about nearly any combo deck, for example. You can say that in Modern. Sometimes you don't draw Birthing Pod. Well, what does your deck do then? Sometimes you draw all the X-Arcs, none of the Splinter Twins. What happens now?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same argument here. This deck does, of course, it has Brainstorm on top. So as well as it can, it mitigates that to some degree. Maybe there will be some games where just all of your crop rotations and all of your expedition maps were just, those are the bottom 8 cards of your deck, and you don't actually get to ever search out the Cloud Post you need. You don't get your mana engine going. You weren't going to win that game. That's fair.
Although a lot of the decks that you kind of mentioned there have, the modern decks you just mentioned, kind of have backup plans. Pod can just kind of play good stuff on the table and win. And Deceiver XR, Splinter Twin, much closer to the type of experience you're describing, but a little more redundant. This feels, maybe it's just sort of this irrational, visceral thing.
Right.
But I've watched this deck in action sometimes where it just feels like it gets more hands than most decks in that realm of I kind of just can't do anything, or I'm under the gun too fast.
Sure. You said it's kind of a visceral reaction. I think a lot of players have that reaction.
Absolutely.
There's the kind of a general fear of not getting to play Magic.
Yeah.
That I think kind of it dictates a lot of decisions. Some rightfully so, and some I think not so much. I think a lot of players gravitate towards mid-range perhaps more than they should because of that feeling. When you play Jund, you always get to play Magic.
Yeah.
But in this case, you kind of have a backup plan in the form of show and tell. I think that's your backup plan here, even though it is kind of plan A as well.
So, again, this is a deck, even though it looks a little on the gimmicky side, it has had a fair amount of success in the Open Series. I mean, we have, I believe, this is a winning list from Legacy Opens, in fact, and we see it sprinkled across the top 8. So, it's kind of a fun thing, when you get to cover these events, and the elimination rounds often are, you're seeing a lot of Bug and Rug and Stoneforge Mystic and Seek and Show and all that kind of stuff. One of the defining characteristics of Legacy is there's this huge card pool, there's all these different interactions, and people who sort of master their sphere can be competitive even though the deck may not make the most sense objectively. And to me, 12 Post is absolutely one of those decks.
Yeah. And one of the big appeals, I think, for Blue Green Cloud Post actually is that it is a combo deck that does not use the graveyard in any significant capacity.
Yeah, with Deathrite Shamans and Rest in Peace and all that kind of stuff. Not using the graveyard is a big deal. What was the ruling there?
So we are back in action, but it looks like The yeah, the ruling I think still in question. In fact, so we're getting things straightened out. Looked like we were about to kick things off again, but that was the head judge checking in on things.
And it looks like we are good to go.
All right. So we're waiting on confirmation as to like what exactly the solution was. Did we shuffle? Did we change the order of the top three at all?
Yeah, we'll find out momentarily.
So the kind of the point of contention here, of course, that there's some unknown information. Yeah, Alex, I think, likely would have wanted to hide the top card if it was a card that was particularly relevant in the matchup. So Matthew, possibly like knowing now where he wouldn't have known before that he needs to play around, for example, a Croson Grip or something like that. And Matthew White going to take another peek, waiting for permission this time. But peeks, leaves. The ruling, of course, was Matthew White received a warning. There was no game loss or anything like that. Just a warning. They did not shuffle the deck. The library order was maintained in full, and we moved on. So, and here we see a kind of example of what I was saying. Jace, again, not as the Fate Seal effect of Jace, just not so impressive against a deck that has so many ways to shuffle its library. Matthew White took a peek, said keep that one. Alex said no thanks.
And also go way over the top, as you're seeing right here, with an end of turn Ayavugan to go get Ulamog.
So, activates the eye, fetches up Ulamog. I believe we can untap and just cast that, right?
Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, plus the eye. So that should do it.
Yep. So just with the lands in play, I have exactly enough for an Ulamog. Alex going for a spin.
And these spins get really complicated now against an active Jace, especially if he's planning on tapping out.
Well, the tapping out for Ulamog solves the Jace problem well enough.
Sure.
So Cloud Post there, that's going to provide even more mana. A Glimmer Post there, but that's going to improve all of the Cloud Posts currently in play. And here it comes. Ulamog shows up, the trigger targeting Jace. And there is a Council's Judgment there in Matthew White's hand. That is a solution to that Ulamog. Counterspell works too. Counterspell is going to send the Ulamog to the graveyard where it and everything else promptly get shuffled back in.
The issue is, what's the long-term solution here?
Right.
I mean, Ayavugan allows him to get Ulamog. We're getting to the point where it's going to be every single turn.
Yes, that was over the course of 2 turns. We saw end step activate Ayavugan on tap cast, but Glimmer Post showed up this turn and virtually added 4 mana, I think, to Alex's, or just 3. Increase Alex's mana stock by 3. That's going to keep going up and up. Yeah, I think we are actually getting very close to the point where you can just search it up, recast it in 1 turn. Even if we're not there yet, it's only going to take 2 turns to go through that process.
And you're seeing the demonstration here of the issue with the matchup with Blue Eye Red Miracles. Neither fast enough, and even its power cards, even its aces in most circumstances, just not effective enough against a deck that can go this far over the top.
Yeah. I like the kind of creative solution there for Matthew White, rather than going through, jumping through all the hoops of bouncing Batterskull, replaying it, letting Engineered Explosives kill the germ, bouncing it, replaying again. Just smack it onto your Stoneforge Mystic.
Yep. But Alex with a lot of time here at 13 life.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's as best a clock as Matthew White can do here, I think. And it is currently a 3-turn clock. Any Glimmer Post that came down would add a turn to that, but 3 turns is, I think, more than you can afford to give Alex right now. And Oracle of Moldiah going to come down for Alex. This is a fun card to see in action.
Oh, boy.
This is play lands off the top of your deck and Exploration stapled onto a 2/2. So flips over Tropical, puts it immediately into play. I love the Oracle of Moldiah Sensei's Divining Top interaction as well.
Yeah. A lot of sweet synergies in this deck.
So Force of Will lingering on top there. And Alex, with that Tropical, now has access to 2 blue mana. So if Matthew were to do something scary, Alex can, at will, tap the Sensei's Divining Top, draw a card, Force of Will, whatever spell. So kind of sitting with a seal of Force of Will in play. He is sitting on Eye of Ugin as well. So at the end of turn, he is likely going to shuffle that Force of Will away. But if he needs it before then, it's there.
And I think what's most likely to happen here is Alex is just going to dial up Emrakul at the end of the turn.
I would think so. Assuming he does have enough mana to untap and cast Emrakul, which, again, when these games get to this stage, it's not easy to eyeball. But if we're not there, we're close.
Yeah, it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, -2 for Eye of
Yes,
Ugin. So he's good to go.
13 is exactly what we need. So yeah, dialed up Emrakul would be effective here. Now that does play into the Council's Judgment that Matthew White is sitting on.
Well, it's going to be it's just going to be Time Walk.
Sure.
He's going to get his turn, and then I don't know. With Oracle, it seems like he's still potentially entering the point where he just gets the full reset every turn, depending on how the spins go.
The full reset, but the Council of Judgment actually exiles the Emrakul for good. You know, it's not kind of a shuffle back in situation like we normally see when trying to deal with Emrakul.
Right.
So if you can break up that loop, then we get to a point where Alex is just, quote unquote, just getting Ulamog every turn. And maybe that's surmountable. And, okay, we see Ulamog, actually, it looks like, what Alex is going to search up this turn.
Oh.
So that's interesting. There's a possibility that would he have boarded Emrakul out? You never do that, right? Like,
No.
That's just not a thing. Okay.
It could be the Council's Judgment that you just alluded to.
All right, sure. I don't think Alex has seen it, but you can probably kind of sniff it out from here. Matthew White certainly has been sitting on one card the entire game, giving the impression that it is very, very valuable, which it certainly is. So Alex going to untap, give the top a spin.
Yeah, this is in the upkeep, so we can set the Oracle as best as possible.
Draws a Needle, and draw step, Vendilion Click for Matthew White. Ulamog currently stranded in the hand, so Vendilion Click could shuffle it along for at least another turn. We know Alex's hand is Needle, Ulamog, and 2 mystery cards, I believe. And so Alex then, in response, has to lay out his lands, think about, like, okay, what's the balance here? So Venser, Shaper Savant, in response to Vendilion Click.
And this is excellent. I mean, he just needs to buy a little bit of time here. Matthew not in a position to recast the Vendilion Click.
No. And actually, Matthew White really exposing himself here because he, by casting Vendilion Click, he does tap too low to cast Council's Judgment.
Yeah.
So if things blow up in his face here, he's got no backup plan.
Council's Judgment on the screen.
And so it looks like that other card, Source of Plowshares. So Matthew White going to respond then to the Venser. Do we know what the Venser was targeting?
Probably the click on the stack, I would assume.
Okay, the actual, the spell.
And the issue with Council's Judgment breaking all this stuff up is Council's Judgment's a sorcery. And so Emrakul gets to take the turn and trigger.
Yeah.
Then there's the Annihilator. Now, Matthew may be able to generate enough permanents to get over to the hump there and then get to the next thing. But it seems like Eye of Ugin's likely to wrap it up from that point.
Oh, okay. Council's Judgment is a sorcery. Okay. I have been locked in my coverage cage since that card has been legacy legal. So that is not a card that I have had the pleasure of casting, personally. So yeah, certainly no risk in going for a click there. But Oracle of Moldiah sent farming, so Alex will get no further advantage there. Looks like Vendilion Click is sent back to the hand, and free raid now for Alex. Yep, there comes Ulamog. Matthew White, only the one Flooded Strand untapped, no mana available to bounce the Batterskull in response. So Batterskull going to the graveyard. Matthew White left with just a naked Stoneforge Mystic. Against, what is Ulamog at? 11-11? 12-12?
10-10, I think.
10-10?
I don't know. It's big.
He's big.
Sufficiently big.
Yep, 10-10. There we go. And Pithy Needle to follow up there for Alex. We knew he drew that. And waiting for confirmation on what he named. I think Stoneforge Mystic would be my assumption. But, okay, named Sensei's Divining Top. Okay, and Matthew White going for Council Judgment after all. Alex gives her a read. Confirms, yes, in fact, this can kill Ulamog. Exile it for good.
Step 1.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So Alex, loses the first of his big scary monsters. So now just going to lean on Emrakul to close this one out. I think if I had to pick just one, that's the one I want to fight.
Yeah. And I would suspect that has not been removed from his deck.
Sure. Is that? Yeah, okay, yeah. So one Ulamog, one Emrakul. I have seen versions of this deck that do have a Kozilek as well. But Alex does not have access to a Kozilek. So if Matthew White does find another Council's Judgment and gets a main phase in which to cast it, then we look like he might actually be able to kind of weather the storm here. That's a really tall order.
Yeah, it's a really tall order.
All right. So Alex takes his draw. Matthew White plays the Vendilion Click, which we already knew about. Alex reveals the Sensei's Divining Top, which in fact he already knew about. And Matthew White more than happy to let him keep that one, because even if Alex were to recast it, he can't use it because he turned it off with the Pithing Needle. Just going to replay the top and pass, sitting on Ayabugan, which he will happily use to fetch up an Emrakul and go nuts with.
And you can see Matthew's hand here is just 2 tops. Kind of dumps them on the table.
Nice. All right. So the Sniper's Pithing Needle.
Yeah.
Saw it coming.
And now, unfortunately for Matthew,
The Spaghetti Monster of Doom cometh.
it's not just an Emrakul, but it's a hard cast Emrakul.
Yes.
It's an Emrakul with a trigger.
Yes. A full-blown Emrakul more than once if necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. No current way for Alex to search up a Caracas, but many live draws in which to do it, and doesn't even need it really. Just one swing of the Emrakul is going to be plenty. So there we see it, the beast itself.
A Kalani Garden for good measure.
and a plant.
It's a nice combo. The 15-15 Annihilator 6 and the 0-1 plant
I love
token.
it. Yeah, just like, hi, I'm Emrakul. This
The
is my,
yin and the yang.
This is my cactus. Yeah. All right, so Emrakul is going to be cast. The trigger is going to give Alex an extra turn. Fencer's going to swing for 2, because why not? And extra turn begins for Alex. Takes a peek.
Now the upshot is Matthew does have his 2 tops to sacrifice.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so only 4 relevant permanents. Emrakul comes swinging. One only hopes that Alex is making the appropriate dinosaur noises. You're legally obligated to make.
It's a dinosaur noise?
I mean, I know it is not necessarily a dinosaur, but when you're rumbling with monsters of that, Godzilla noises.
I assumed it was sort of just this kind of.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, sure. Well, a really loud one at least.
Right. Or sort of this loud droning noise.
Just like a really dull siren going off.
Yeah.
That blows up all your lands. Okay, so Matthew White choosing to keep Volcanic Island Plains, I believe. Not actually positive what that third land is, but and a Vendilion Click. So not completely out of it, but really completely out of it.
And what's the follow-up?
Might be a follow-up of. So going to grip. Okay, grips. That's a roundabout way of dealing with your opponent's Sensei's Divining Top.
That's cute.
I like it. I like it.
Grips the needle after it's all sacked.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And just has this top ready to go. Takes a peek. Sees Tropical Brainstorm, and I think it's a crop rotation.
Uh-oh.
Draws. Casts the Brainstorm. Must not have been a crop rotation. I guess it still could have been. Brainstorms into Brainstorm. Keeps on digging. You really start to see the appeal of casting Brainstorm once you see people chaining them like this.
Well, this is actually not that impressive. When they do it to the fetch land and they had, 2 lands
Sure.
and a spell in their hand, that's not very good. And then it goes to that to 3 good spells. That's the charm.
Sure. Okay, so
Right now, I'd rather have Opt, but
fair. Yeah, this is a lot of work to go digging 2 cards in. So Trinket Mage, reshuffle, can retrieve Expedition Map, which can then retrieve Caracas, I think is the long-term plan here.
Yep. 1 map in the deck.
And the question is how much mana we have floating.
He can't reset and recast this turn, but
I suspect he cannot, but Matthew White takes a peek, finds a Tundra. That's certainly not going to do it, and extends a hand. So Alex going to 6-1.
Yep. Alex Khanin 6-1 with blue-green cloud post, still definitely in the running for the elimination rounds.
Not locked up, but needs another win. And as I mentioned, already a legacy finalist at an Open here in Dallas.
Yep. Very impressive thus far for Matthew White. 2 losses and out of the running. Not much to be done about that matchup.
No.
I mean.